Welcome back to another episode of Highlights for the Scattered Abroad Network. I'm your host, Wayne Rogers, and excited to be able to highlight another great work in our brotherhood. And so with me today is my friend Nathan Franson. He is the minister at the Mariposa Avenue Church of Christ in Citrus Heights, California.
Yes, sir.
I always kind of mess up there, trying to remember exactly where we are. But anyway, also an author and a speaker on a couple of seminars that we're going to talk about today. But thank you for sitting down with me. And I'm grateful to be able to talk about this because I want people to know about the work that you're doing, especially thinking about the Mormon Church, the LDS Church, and thinking about those that are seeking the truth, maybe that are caught in that, and then also thinking about others who obviously we get door knockers. Pretty often from the Mormon Church, and so what do we say to them? What do we, So that's what you deal with in this. But so Nathan, tell us a little bit about your background, if you will. I think that helps kind of set the stage for what the work that you're doing now. I think that's important for people to know.
Sure. So I grew up in the LDS Church. Grew up in Salt Lake City, Utah. So I was kind of right in the nest of everything happening. And I was in it for about 20 years of my life, really active in it. And there's a lot of activities that happen in Mormonism.
Sure.
I mean, we were constantly busy in sports, and everyone kind of does things together. And in the neighborhood that I grew up, everyone was sort of a part of it.
Yeah.
And so we all knew each other, and our parents knew each other, and so really saturated with it. And so anyway, as I got older, probably as an early teen, you learn more and they get deeper with the discussions,
Sure.
of course, and classes. And there were some things that started coming up, and it really didn't make a lot of sense to me, the way that it was worded. And different parts of the doctrine that really didn't make sense to me, or at least wanted more of an explanation of it, I should say. And so I started questioning some of my teachers about it. But a lot of the discussions and a lot of the topics were, they came back with really sort of ambiguous answers. It really didn't it didn't answer anything.
Gotcha.
And it left me with more questions than anything. And so as I studied more on my own, and I was sort of at the disadvantage that I had some friends that weren't Mormon, but most of my close friends were Mormon, most of the people that I knew. And so it's not like I could just ask questions outside of there to religious people. And so I did a lot of investigating on my own and studying on my own. And just the more I did that, and the more I heard from them and from other people that I knew in the LDS Church, it just seemed that I got further and further away from being connected to it.
Right.
And I finally got to a point where I felt like I couldn't be doing that anymore and feel good about it, and so and so I finally left, and it was sad because when I did leave, I was really angry because it's just everything that I thought I had a handle on, everything I thought I understood, just wasn't what I thought. And that was the only religious world that I knew of. And so when something like that happens, and it's a common feeling, I know, for a lot of people that come out of any church or any denomination they might have grown up in and just been that involved with. And so anyway, so that I finally left when I was about 20 years old, maybe just before I would have gone on my Mormon mission or gotten my mission call.
Gotcha.
Is when I finally said I can't do this anymore.
How did your family respond? Let's start with your family first.
Okay.
How did your family respond?
It was it was sort of mixed, and it's because my father passed away when I was about 2 years old. Maybe I never knew my father, but he's the one that actually converted my mom.
Okay.
And my mom grew up Lutheran, and so he converted my mom. And when he died, I think part of her felt like she could not just go a different direction. She felt like she was betraying him or something. And so the longer that we were in it, the more grounded she became in it. And so she raised us. I've got a couple of brothers, and anyway, she raised us in a single parent Mormon home for for most of our lives, and it was, and so there was that mixed feeling, and because she was really proud. When I was in the church, I served as a deacon, and but eventually became the title of priest or whatever when
Right.
when you get in your teenage years, and so it was, so there's a lot of prestige for young people anyway, and the parents are really proud, but walking away from it, it was hard for her at first because she thought, this was it. I mean, this was the truth, and here I am just not wanting anything to do with it, and so it was tough at first, and we had some really heated discussions with
Sure.
it at the beginning, and over time she sort of softened up, and I guess she was, she's gotten to the point where she said, well, that at least I'm doing something or have some direction or
Right.
whatever, but it was really tough for her. My brothers sort of, just kind of accepted it. I know they didn't agree with it, but
Right.
they accepted it, and the most of it was just my friends at the time. I lost all my friends
Yeah.
when I left it. So
And it's a pretty much kind of cut you off kind of situation.
for a
from what-
lot of it, and
Yeah.
I was fortunate in that was the worst that happened to me. I know there are people that have left the Mormon Church, and much worse things have happened to them.
Sure.
They've been harassed, they've been threatened, they've had physical violence done to them, they've had their tires slashed.
Yeah. We were talking about that. Yeah.
It was, so it was. They've gone through a lot of things that were much worse than mine. Of course, when you're that young, you just think, oh, well, I guess if you guys want nothing to do with me,
Yeah. They're really mad at me.
Right.
Well, let's think about then. Of course, there's much more to the journey toward the truth.
Right.
That you took certainly after that, and learning the truth, and so. I guess maybe just for a moment, kind of, okay, you leave the Mormon Church, and we've talked about this in the past, but I know there was a transition period, obviously, where you were kind of fed up with anything,
Yes.
but still seeking at the same time, and so talk a little bit about that, and then coming obviously to the truth,
Okay.
and then we'll get into what that led to ultimately.
Sure. Yeah, when I left, there was a lot of animosity, as I mentioned. That, I just thought, if this isn't the truth, then nothing can be. And I never really didn't believe in God per se, but I just hated all forms of religion. I thought this, religion was just it was just such a manipulation, and of course I came from, with coming out of Mormonism, it is a cultic religion. I mean, it fits the parameters of what a cult is.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of things that I had realized that I didn't when I was in it still. When you're right in the middle of it, you don't
Sure.
realize some of the tactics that are being used and so forth. But when I left it, I was so angry, and it took a long time before I could actually start talking about it and not get worked up or passionate about it. And so it was like that for probably almost 10 years. As you mentioned, I was searching for something. I just didn't know what it was.
Yeah.
I just wanted some sort of clarification, I guess, in my religious life. And so towards, about close to 10 years later, I guess, I met a man named Leslie, and he was a member of the Lord's Church, and such a great guy. I mean, I owe so much to him, and I never got to even tell him because I don't talk to him anymore. But his niece, I was actually dating his niece, and and we almost got married at one point. And so anyway, we got to know each other, Leslie and I, and I never really, by that time, I'd started going to like an independent Baptist church because I just thought, okay, I need something. And this seems to fill something because at least it's religious.
Right.
But that was it. It was just, it was the first time I started going back to church again.
I got you.
And with Leslie, I knew he didn't attend that church, but he attended somewhere. And so I asked him about it, and it was, I asked him what the Church of Christ was, and I'd never heard of it. And so he explained it a little bit, and I said, that sounds really pretty interesting. And so I went back to our pastor at this Baptist church, and I asked him, what do you think about the Church of Christ? And he told me, oh, they're a cult. And it's, it's so weird because that seems to be the trigger word for so much. I mean, if you don't agree with something, it's a cult. It has to be a cult, right? Even if it doesn't fit the guidelines of it. It just, and he said, they think they're the only ones going to heaven. And I said, really? So I go back to Leslie, and I said, Leslie, it's interesting. My pastor said that where you're going is a cult. And he said, oh, what makes him say that? And I couldn't explain it. Right. I said, I don't know. I just said it was. And he said, okay. He said, well, here's the thing. He says, what you can do. He said, what if you were to just come with us one Sunday? And he said, there's no pressure, but you can come and kind of check it out and see. And we'd had some discussions, some Bible discussions in the meantime. Of course, at that point, I thought, I knew a whole lot more than what I really did.
Yeah.
And so he was very patient with me, which is what I needed. And so he asked if we wanted to go and see where he attended. And I said, okay, I'll do that. And so I went, and obviously the first thing when you walk in the door, you notice the lack of instruments, or there's no band, there was no piano, there's no drums, there's anything. And I think I thought at that point, maybe they can't afford these. And so I have no idea. And so I did ask him, and the worship service, I noticed the singing. They did a lot of singing. And so I asked him about the worship service, and he explained it biblically with Ephesians 5:19, Colossians 3:16, and that made a lot of sense to me. I said, that actually, I really like that, because I thought, it's, this has, by that time, I knew everything that was wrong, and so for me to trust religion again, it was going to have to be so biblically sound, right? Because I wasn't just accepting any religion. I know I was just going into it, to try to fulfill something, but I really wanted to trust religion again, or wanted to not be as angry as I was. Right. But it had to be something that was just so complete and so cohesive in my mind. And so when everything was Bible with him. And he gave, the scriptural backing for it, and I hadn't heard that in a long time, and so I was really impressed with that, and and that was just worship,
right?
And so we got to talking and got on the subject of salvation, and we went back and forth, and he finally stopped me at one point, and he said, "Could you do me a favor?" And I said, "All right." And he said, "Could you read the book of Acts?" And no one had ever told me that. No one in my whole life ever had told me to read a book specifically out of the Bible. I knew the Book of Mormon, that we were encouraged growing up to read the book. I mean, I must have read that 3 or 4 times, never once with the Bible, because it wasn't as high on their priority list as what the Book of Mormon was. And so I thought it was peculiar, but I said, okay, I'll do it. And he says, when you do this, don't talk to your pastor, don't talk to me, don't talk to friends, don't talk to anyone, you just read it. And if you see things that are different than how you might understand, write them down, and we'll discuss it afterwards. And he says, but keep a close eye on the conversions. And I said, okay. So started reading the book of Acts, and sure enough, by the end of it, and we started talking again, and he said, what do you think? And I said, I think I need to be baptized. And that's finally where I was in that place where I could be calm enough where I didn't act out, when Mormonism was mentioned, and where I could, something that I could trust. And I knew, with it being biblically grounded the way it was, I finally saw the church for what it was in the New Testament. And
well, isn't it amazing too how simple it is? Just read the book of Acts.
Absolutely.
That's always an amazing thing, and people that will take the time to do that, who have maybe a different background,
right?
And just spend some time, read the book of Acts. It's amazing. It tells everything that you need to know, right? As far as here's how you need to be saved.
Oh, absolutely. In fact, another thing is that the one thing I always noticed about him, because I had other friends by that time that were religious. They kind of came to my life, and they would always try to talk me into going here or coming here, but it was them trying to talk me into it. Leslie just kept it to the Bible and says, you decide. You know what this says, You decide. And it was always ever since then, it was a kind of a tactic that I would use with studying the Bible with someone else. You know, realizing I can't talk them into anything.
Sure.
And I shouldn't try to talk them into anything. Let the Bible do it.
Yeah.
And if you can get them into it's one of, you know, and I know it sounds really cliched and oversimplified, but it's just, you know, let the Bible be the Bible.
Right.
That's what's going to convict them. So if you can get them in there and show them what, so
and that's the thing too, you know, and we as preachers, you know, we try to help train people obviously in holding Bible studies and do that. But it's really just that simple. You know, we really need to let the Bible do its work, you know, and direct people in that direction, you know, too. And if they are truly seeking, they will find clearly.
Absolutely, if they're honest about it.
If they're honest about it, that's right. So obviously, what we want to highlight is the work that you've been doing since then. Okay. Obviously, preaching. You know, we met each other in preaching school, obviously at Memphis, and but clearly, you know, there's a passion here, you know, with your background and your experience. I know that you have authored a book and you have been doing seminars, and so that's what we want to certainly highlight is that part of your work right now, and to think about that. So we've got the Breaking the Chains book, and so tell us a little bit about that, and then the seminars.
Okay,
too.
Yeah. So this is the book. I mean, it came out a couple of years ago, and it's just breaking the chains. It's obviously a term that sort of, you know, it's used a lot in, I know, with drug rehab and, you know, breaking away from the, you know, what holds you down, and it's used in the religious context of, you know, kind of breaking free from something, and that's what it was. That's how I looked at it with Mormonism, is that I kind of broke free from that finally, realizing what I didn't have, you know, at that time, and then realizing what I do have now. And so anyway, I call it Breaking the Chains, and it's really sort of a semi-autobiography of why I left, things that I had questioned, things that I learned, and I wanted to share it with other people. You know, and so I thought, you know, if my experience, and I know I'm not the only experience, but if my experience can help others kind of see it, and it can help them and prepare them to talk to someone in the LDS faith, or even someone in the LDS faith. I'll tell people all the time when they ask me about the book, or if they get the book for someone else, is, you know, they think, okay, can I give this to someone in the Mormon church?
Yeah.
And I will warn them, you know, if you give this to them, they're going to get upset at first. If they're, you know, hopefully it will lead to discussions. And, you know, because I don't want to come off, and I have been accused of, you know, just, of course they don't know my intentions, but they think I'm just some ex-angry Mormon that wants to spread a lot
Tear
of
it down,
right.
Right.
And that's never what my intention is. I mean, you know, you have to expose error for what it is.
Right.
Paul did the same thing, but he would never tear down anyone.
Right.
You know, he had their soul in mind, and and that's the most important thing, is, you know, is trying to get someone to start looking at what the Bible has to say about it, and shift their thinking towards that direction. In here, this is what these are some of the arguments, some of the discussions, some of the things that have to do with the LDS Church that, for lack of a better term, contradict what the Bible has to say about it. And I saw that. And so, you know, writing, you know, the concept of God, their plan of salvation. They believe in the Levitical priesthood coming back, and the Melchizedek priesthood coming back. And so it's a lot of things like that, you know, a lot of territory. Doesn't have everything, but these are some of the key components of, you know, to hopefully help someone.
Right, and I know you've said that before, you know, thinking about the, especially the seminar, you know, what to know when talking to a Mormon, you know, and stuff like that. I remember you telling me in the past, you know, look, we can't cover everything. It's impossible,
right?
You know, to cover everything, especially in 5 lessons or however, you know, maybe 6 lessons or whatever. But here's how to start a conversation. Here's how to begin this. Here's some things that are noteworthy, at least. And I appreciate what you said too. You know, knowing that they're going to read this, that in any time error is exposed, it's gonna attack probably itself. You know, I mean, it's gonna come at you.
No one wants to think that they're wrong.
Right. So, but if you are talking with someone who has an open mind, you know, who is maybe already questioning stuff too, this is a great way in to be able to help at least open that door a little bit more,
Right.
And to get them thinking about those things. And it's like anything else. It's going to be their journey trying to to make their way out of that. We want to be there with the truth to be able to help them, obviously. But this book is excellent, I know, in exposing some of those things and talking about even the prophecies. And so there's a lot of prophecies that are associated, and that's what kind of always amazed me, I think, with studying Mormonism, is to, the Bible clearly says, look, if even one prophecy doesn't come true,
exactly,
he's a false prophet.
It's one of the most compelling cases that you could make against anything.
Right.
It doesn't have to be Mormonism.
Right,
any
absolutely.
Religion, so.
Yeah. And so I think that's and that's been kind of the approach that I've taken in the past, is to even, specifically things Joseph Smith had prophesied and
Right.
supposedly had said that didn't come to pass. Those things, have to rank high in the conversation.
Right.
Eventually, maybe not to begin with, obviously, but we have to get there to talk about some of those things, and to, because it's like anything else. Even if there is if somebody comes at you and they're full fledged, you're talking to two quote Mormon elders, at your door,
Right.
and you're sitting down with them and having a discussion. And you come at them with, well, they've probably never heard any of those things questioned.
There's a good chance of that. I mean, that they may honestly hadn't
Right.
heard of it. The other thing we have, you're dealing with when you talk to someone in the LDS church, and I know because I'd been in that seat and I tried to do the same thing, is compartmentalizing. They are famous for that.
Sure.
And, in other words, you can present something that's truthful or something that, that they fail with doing. And a lot of times they'll say, okay, that's interesting. I never thought about it but I'm going to put this to the side and look at all of this, though.
Right.
And look at the good we're doing.
Sure.
And so they're compartmentalizing the truth of the matter. And you can't do that with the religion. Christ never did that. Paul
Right.
never did that. I mean, Christianity was out there in the open.
Right.
And it was changing lives. And so you couldn't just hide parts of it because people wouldn't trust it, for one thing.
Right.
And when you have a religion, any religion, whether it's, and I know Mormonism's not the only one that does this,
Right.
but you've got to look at all the different factors in this and how they measure up against the Bible. Fact check it. That's the most important thing that we can do, is to fact check it against the Bible. Have that, have that standard of authority. Because if we don't have a standard of authority, you can believe literally anything.
Sure.
It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter how you live or believe or whatever. And so, but I did a lot of that when I was in it myself, and that's how I know what to look for and how they try to do the same thing. And so I tell people, just be patient with it,
Right.
because that's just sort of how, it's how we're sort of programmed in the Mormon Church, is to think this way, and you see that a lot happening within that, and so it just kind of catches on. You think, well, this is just what I'll do. It's just at least look at the good that we're doing.
Right.
And it's not, Christianity is not a religion based on good enough.
True. Yes. It can't just be good enough. That's
Right.
right. That's a great point. Think about the seminars that you're doing, helping congregations, and the first one specifically deals with, how to talk to a Mormon.
Right.
And so kind of give us an overview of that, and then we'll talk about the follow up to that.
Okay. The seminar, What to Know When Talking to a Mormon, I've been doing it for a number of years, and just to kind of backtrack a little bit, I had to make sure that I was at a place where I could talk about it that openly.
Sure.
And give advice that openly without getting upset at what I had to go through.
Sure.
And everything, and because that's going to come across if you do. And so it's to help. Yeah, I get calls all the time and emails and so forth that people are going into a discussion with a missionary next week, or they have a friend or a family member, and they don't know where to start. They don't know what to bring up. They don't know what they're going to bring to the table, and a lot of people get intimidated. Right. It's interesting. It's like one of those things. We'd been on the campaigns when we were at Memphis School of Preaching, and we got nervous because we didn't know. With these campaigns, you didn't know what what that person knows answering
Right.
the door. A lot of students get intimidated about, even though we're learning Bible, what if they know their scripture or can quote scripture better than I can?
Yeah.
Well, so what? But you still get intimidated by
Right.
that. And so I think a lot of people just aren't sure what the missionaries are going to bring. And, and they're people. And, and you think, and so you try to lay some common ground. They're trying to get you, in their minds, they're trying to get you to heaven like you want to get them to heaven.
Sure.
And so we at least have that in common. But let's look at what the deciders and the truth is going to be within that. And so the seminar is to bring up some things that you can discuss with them. In that first meeting, the second meeting. I mean, I always tell people, and I tell that I talk to them about it at the seminar. Having a first discussion with the missionary is just easy. It is. You could not ask them to. And they come and knock on your door. Why do people try to? They're coming to you, and people get so worked up about that. I don't know why. They're hitting the lights. They're just, they don't. They're pretending they're not home, right. And the people at the door know that you're home.
Right.
But they just don't. They're either not ready or just don't want the discussion or whatever it is. And yet that next Sunday they'll just say, "Okay, Lord, please provide us with opportunities to do." You can't get an easier one than that. Right. They're coming to your door.
Yeah.
You can invite them in. You can sit down and you can talk about the Bible.
You get the hometown advantage, so to speak.
That's
it's
right.
your house.
That's exactly it. So that first discussion is always the easiest one. We don't want just the first discussion.
Right.
I try to encourage people. You're going for the second one and the third one, and to keep it going as long as you can. Now there comes a time, and there could be any number of reasons why they could be pulled from that area.
Right.
And someone new be put in that area. If there's if they see that maybe their mission president that's in that area sees that they start questioning their own faith and starting to chase what you give them, a lot of the times they'll just pull them because they don't want them to be obviously impacted by that. And sometimes it's just by happenstance. They get other, they rotate them.
Right.
And so there's a lot that happens in their 2 years. But the longer you can go, the more trust it's going to develop. And when that happens, the deeper you can get with your discussions. You can ask them things that you wouldn't on that first one. A lot of people really try to go for the jugular on that first one and ask them all the questions and then say, "Oh, you guys can't answer this," and maybe you should go think about that. And when they hear a lot when they're out there. I mean, they go to a lot of houses, have a lot of conversations, and so this is designed to to help maybe direct in certain in different ways of things to bring up in it, to question them about it. It's okay to ask questions. It's a good thing to ask questions, and good, just different things that you can discuss with them regarding their own religion, what the Bible has to say. Are there contradictions? Are there, prophecy comes up in it, and it's, so there's a lot of different areas that can be covered.
And it is for, every reason probably that we're human, and we like to. There's a self-preservation. We want to. We have the truth, and so we want to make sure that that the truth always wins. And so there's that anxiety. Well, what if they come at us and we're not ready for that question?
Right.
And especially a group that to most people, there's this mystery around, obviously, Mormonism and the LDS group. So it's kind of you can see where that anxiety, that fear comes, to us, when they knock on the door, am I ready for that, because for that discussion.
Right, and I'm glad you said that, because it's there's a lot of stereotypes that come with Mormons, and if you're not ready and you're not prepared with it, you can get kind of caught flat-footed on it. If you don't, I always think that, if you're going into a conversation with someone, or you're going to have a study with someone, and where they're coming from, it's to your advantage to get to know where they're coming from, and know a little bit about it. And so I'll give them some of the doctrinal things in the seminar of what to bring up. I was baptized for the dead, for instance, when I was in the LDS church. I was baptized for probably 40 or 50 people by proxy. And so that always comes up because that's a big
Right.
one that people know about. There are certain things that people
Right.
always connect to Mormonism,
Right.
even if it doesn't happen anymore. They always love talking about polygamy,
Yeah.
and which is interesting because there's one of the sessions I talk about what not to bring up.
Yeah.
That's not going to lead it in a. That's not going to lead it in a really
Right.
in a good direction, or one that's going to that's going to be more counterproductive than anything else. And so you want to stay away from certain issues.
I mean, that's a great discussion later.
Yes.
When somebody's already questioning other things.
Right.
You know, but you may be just stepping off into someone's family situation.
Oh, absolutely.
It's very, very personal all of a sudden, and so now it's a personal attack, not just a doctrinal discussion.
Right.
And so and I think that's a good point. And so and in that I think you're better equipped, obviously, you know, to be able to sit down with them or have them come to sit down with you, really in your home, you know. And when you start thinking of it in those terms, they're coming to you, they're knocking on your door, they're
Right.
going to sit in your living room. And as Christians, we have Scripture, we have the Bible, you know, and so, but there are things that obviously can help, especially a discussion with someone from that background, and so
Right.
I appreciate that. The follow-up seminar, Be Transformed, I think is what you
Yes.
title those. Talk about that just a little bit and kind of where that goes,
Okay.
you know, as a good follow-up, but it probably stands alone in many ways, or it can stand alone by itself.
Right.
Just thinking about any of our transition from whatever we used to be in the past, you know,
Right.
denominationally or whatever, you know, or nothing, some of us, to going into now we have the truth, and so taking those next steps.
Sure. So where that started, or kind of the roots of where that was, I was doing the seminar, I remember, in New Zealand. And at one of the breaks, there was a guy that was in the audience, and he came up to me and he said, "How do you do it?" And I said, "How do you do what?" Or he asked the question. And he said, "How do you not get angry? How do you just not, how do you just stop that?"
Right.
And it was a really interesting question. I came to find out that he had only been about 5 months removed from leaving the Mormon church. And I said, "You've got to get to a place where you don't let it consume you. You just can't, or else, because it's really easy to let it just eat you up from the inside out." And so, you've got to decide, I've left, but that doesn't have to define me. It doesn't
Right,
have to
sure.
define the rest of my religious life and questions. And so that was sort of the roots of why, because I get asked a lot, okay, you left Mormonism, but what about that time in between? What brought you to the Lord's church? A lot of people think I just went right to the Lord's church right out of Mormonism, and it didn't. There was about 10 years, as I mentioned, in between that. And so Be Transformed is sort of that journey in between that. And that's why it's made and tailored for beyond just Mormonism. I mean, certainly you can include it with that, but just any religion. When a person leaves a denomination or any church and they're searching, and many people are searching. They want the truth. They need something to validate, their belief. And it's almost like, with drug rehab, you have this, when you leave something or leave drugs, you've got to fill that void with something positive. Otherwise, you're going to fall right back into, or there's a danger of falling back into what you had before. And the same thing happens with religion. When you leave a religion, you need to fill that, because there's a void now in your life, in your spiritual life. And that's going to get filled with something.
Right.
And you don't want it to be bad. You don't want it to be the world. You don't want it to be a false religion, because false religions are as quick to jump on that as anyone.
Right.
And so you need something that has to do with the truth to fill that void.
Right.
And that's why I developed Be Transformed. And it took a little bit of time, but I've been doing it now for maybe a couple of years, probably. I mean, just because I wanted to really make sure that it was a series that could hit people on so many levels. It widens
Right.
the field, rather than just Mormonism, but it hits it with more, anyone in any church and from
Yeah.
any background. And I called it Be Transformed because you think of what conversion is, or being transformed. I mean, that word transformed, the Greek word, it's it's where we get metamorphosis. There's
Right.
a change that has to occur in your life. And when you look at that, it's based on Romans 12:1 and 2.
Yeah.
And, you can, and so sort of the tagline of it, I guess, is something like, any, people can change, but are they transformed? I can come out of something, but that
Right.
doesn't, or even start looking at the truth of the New Testament church, but that still doesn't mean that I'm transformed. How do I get to that point? How do I make that change in my life from having that background? And that's why I wanted to, really widen it and talk about different, really personal and emotional places that we come from, and spiritual places too, and that, and you can be literally from any religious background or even the world to make that transformation, because that's what I had to go through myself. And so it's
Well, and I think that's good because you, excuse me, I think you think about several of Paul's letters, he'll spend a great deal of time talking about, okay, here's the doctrine, here's the plan of God, here's how all this has come to be. Of course,
Right.
he's writing by inspiration these things, and then it'll switch to a practical. Here's how you put these things into motion in your
Right.
life. Here's what this is going to look like daily in your life. And Romans, of course, does that. You got the first 11 chapters kind of talking about here's what God has done for mankind, and here's who He is, and now here's what He expects of you from 12 and through 16.
Right.
And so, and Ephesians does that as well. So those letters remind us of that. And I like the idea of taking. Not just from Mormonism, but it coming out of anything, and learning the truth, and then putting that truth active in your life.
Right.
What that really looks like, and making those necessary changes along the way. And we don't know everything, obviously, from day one. So it's a lifelong process, really. This idea of being
absolutely.
transformed. Nathan, thank you for sitting down
Sure.
and talking about this. And this is a great work that we wanted to highlight through the Scattered Abroad Network. And I'm grateful for you, brother, for what you're doing and for your family and taking the time with us.